Introduction. Monday the 10th of July 1967 brought on a whole new meaning to my railway career. Instead of travelling to Guildford, I had to make my way to Woking, where most of the men of Guildford had also transferred. The Woking driver's mess room was extended ready for our arrival. The original mess room had a locked-up timber cupboard containing cups, plates and cutlery, the door being secured by an old S-key lock. There was a lot of animosity between the original motormen and the mixed traction men, some of which was understandable because some of our numbers would deliberately annoy them, flashing their pay slips, showing earnings nearly twice as much as motormen. Originally, the lockers provided were standing directly on the floor, and when Hover Mop, as Alex McClimate christened Frank Mitchell, swilled his mop around the floor, the dirty water would slosh into the doors of the bottom lockers. A plinth was later placed under the lockers to keep them about 3 inches from the floor. There wasn't a television until later, just a radio on a small windowsill on the top deck. Pat Kinsella remembers a Reading driver threatening to throw it down the stairs during one altercation. This photograph was taken outside the gentleman's toilet on number 2 platform at Guildford circa 1967. DEMU 1204 is berthed in the dock, probably suffering from a radiator water leak. An assortment of mopeds and motorcycles belonging to various drivers and guards, including Woking driver Charlie Hampshire's 650cc Triumph Thruxton Bonneville. The Guildford Motorman's Room is pictured adjacent to the DEMU, and Charlie and I used to leave our motorcycle helmets there on occasion, much to the disapproval of some of the Guildford motormen. Some of the running foremen at that time were Charlie Cook, Derek Hayter, Harry Harvey, Arthur Vodden, Frank Warren and Frank Chudley. There are also a number of acting running foremen, namely Bernie Gray, Doug Stent, Roy Vigers, Vic Pratt, Ray Beeson, John Berriman and John Carter. Non-clerical staff included Claude Johns and Steve Burke. Although I was still classed as a fireman, to have been renamed Secondman, the duties performed were of an entirely different nature to the sweat and grime of the footplate. I still had another 2 years before I was eligible to take my driving exams, so I had to be content to ride as second man on a variety of mixed traction duties and learn my apprenticeship, so to speak. Most of the drivers that had transferred to Woking had already learnt the relevant traction types, the main freight and ballast work being performed by Type 3 Crompton 1550 horsepower diesel-electric locomotives and the JA and JB type 1600-600 horsepower electro-diesel locomotives. Other duties involved riding second man on a 350 horsepower diesel-electric shunter at Woking up and down yards, and brush type 4 diesel-electric locomotives, HB electro-diesel locomotives, and on various EMU duties allocated to the depot. I begin my story at Woking MT on Monday the 10th of July 1967. Monday the 10th of July 1967 had arrived, and I made my way to Woking, where I was going to start on my new career. My mode of transport at that time was a 500cc Tiger 100 motorcycle that I'd bought earlier that year from Pascal's Cycle and Motorcycles, Woodbridge Road, Guildford. As mentioned in my introduction, the type of work that I would be doing would be completely different from what I'd been used to. Although I had already acted as a second man on a number of running turns before the end of steam, so I had a good idea of what was expected of me. All of the freight and ballast work would now be worked by diesel traction, and at that time quite a number of goods yards were still in operation. We also had several passenger turns, some over the Reading Red Hill line, which was quite enjoyable. The depot also had a number of stone train turns from Woking Yard to either Three Bridges Yard, Tunbridge Yard or sometimes New Cross Gate Yard. We also worked the stone train empties to Salisbury, and as before in the steam days, I never tired of working to this location. I kept a diary of notable experiences that happened at work, but unfortunately some diaries, including that of 1967, were lost during my moving house in 1969, so my experiences will have to start from January 1968. On the 4th of January, I had a Waterloo depot on loan job. It entailed going past from Woking to Wimbledon, and I met my driver, Clive Groom, at Wimbledon West Yard. I'd seen Clive around at Nine Elms and Waterloo during my earlier days on the steam, and we exchanged pleasantries and climbed aboard our steed for the day, a 350 horsepower shunting diesel. After making up our train, we proceeded into Wimbledon station and worked the train round the single line to Merton Abbey, where we took a diversion to the Lines Brothers Triang toy factory. We left some wagons and then travelled at slow speed to the very end of the siding, which at one time connected to the main line at Tooting Junction. Clive then suggested that it was time for a break, so after shutting down the diesel engine and securing the loco, we then visited a pub for a pint, followed by some fish and chips, and because we had some time on our hands, visited the local ABC cinema to see a rather risque film, in those days, starring Sylvia Christel. We then took the 350 horsepower diesel back to Wimbledon West Yard, and I made my way back to Woking. On Tuesday the 30th and Wednesday the 31st of January 1968, I signed on at 8:57, past to Farnham, to work a test train to Alton with driver John Berryman on the first day and driver Jim Parker on the second day. This was a prototype of locomotives that had originally been an electric locomotive, HA class. They had been stripped of their booster and fitted with an auxiliary Paxman diesel engine so that locomotives could be used in non-electrified areas. They would primarily be used for boat train workings between Waterloo and Southampton docks and also Weymouth Quay. And so the months went by. Exceptions from what I've mentioned were working boat trains from Waterloo to Southampton docks, with driver Charlie Hampshire on the 9th of April and driver Bernie Gray on the 19th of April. On both of these days, the trains being hauled by 1550 horsepower Type 3 Crompton locomotives. However, one week in May 1968 was quite notable. The turn of duty entailed signing on at 22:24 and going past to Guildford and then working a van train to Reading. After our break at Reading, we would then walk down to Reading West Yard and wait for the Tavy, a train from Tavistock that arrived around 0400, and work the train to Feltham Yard and then Home Pass. On the Monday, my driver was Ted Wells, and for the rest of the week, except for Thursday when driver Ben Ringer was booked the turn, my driver was Len Boxall. On arrival at Reading, and after being relieved, we would have our PN break in the railway canteen, which was open all night. Len and I spoke to the chef during the week and asked him if it would be possible for him to supply us with steak and chips on the Friday night, and this he duly did. By this time, I'd exchanged my 35mm Ilford Sportsman camera for a Practica 1B SLR single lens reflex with a 50mm 2.8 Tessar lens, which gave me the added flexibility of changing to a telephoto lens when necessary. I'd also bought a 70-200mm zoom lens and remember taking it with me one day when working a stone train to Three Bridges Yard with driver Lew Wooldridge and taking photographs of the planes coming into Gatwick Airport as we were standing under the flight path. Another photograph I took that day was of the cottages that border the limestone cliffs on the approach to Betchworth. On the 2nd of June 1968, I went on a flight myself from Fair Oaks Airport, Chobham, in an Auster light aircraft, and it was then that I took the photo of Guildford Loco that featured in my first book, which is reproduced here. The next photograph shows 4 types of motive power at Guildford in 1968. From left to right, on platform 5, the rear unit of a Portsmouth Waterloo Express formed of a 4-core 3126, on platform 4 displaying a 73 head code and forming the front part of a Waterloo, Portsmouth and Southie stopping service is 2 Bill 2086. On platform 3, 2 Bill 2152 forms the rear part of a stopping service from Guildford to Waterloo via Woking, and finally on platform 2, displaying head code 55, an unidentified 1550 horsepower Type 3 Crompton leaves with a parcels train to Red Hill. On Sunday the 11th of August 1968, driver Ben Ringer and I booked on at 0025 in the morning and went past to Waterloo by taxi and then worked the 0340 AM paper train to Woking. I didn't bother going to bed when I got home and instead went to Brands Hatch with some friends to see the Hutchinson 100 motorcycle racing, where they race around the circuit in reverse. My hero, Mike the Bike Hailwood, dominated the main races, and I took my Practica SLR along loaded with some fast-speed Anscochrome film to capture the action. When I got home, having not slept for 30 hours, I slept like a log. A couple of weeks later, I was booked along with driver Vic Pratt, signing on at 2043 and working a double trip from Guildford Yard to Feltham and return. We were booked together all week. The duty was usually worked by a JB type 1600-600 horsepower electro-diesel locomotive. Vic was pretty conversant with the controls of this type of locomotive, but other drivers that I'd been with didn't have a clue how to work the locomotive, especially on electric power. Some wouldn't even shut the diesel engine down for fear of not being able to restart it, and would perform the whole trip to Feltham and return using diesel power only. They were also in constant fear of knocking the collector shoes off when going into non-electrified sidings, and to save embarrassment, some drivers would rather let you do the driving instead. This photo of 1600-600 horsepower electro-diesel E6013 was taken at Guildford Up Yard carriage sidings and was crewed by driver Mick Sparrow and fireman Alan Mansbridge. The pickup shoes are down on the conductor rail, and the crew are waiting to work a freight from Guildford Up Yard to Feltham Yard. The 600 horsepower diesel engine would be used in non-electrified areas or in yards or sidings, and once regaining the main line, the pickup shoes would be lowered onto the conductor rail and electric power deployed. This photo shows the complex electric-stroke diesel controller arrangement of a JB type, later to become Class 73 electro-diesel locomotive. Heavy rain began to fall on the night of Saturday the 14th of September 1968, continuing unabated the next day. Guildford was the worst hit place, as water began seeping into homes and premises beside the River Wade near the town centre. By the Monday, 16th of September, murky floodwater has reached 6 feet in places, pouring into more homes, businesses and shops such as Plumbers in Millbrook, into St Nicholas Church and the Yvonne Arnaud Theatre, causing thousands of pounds worth of damage. Roads were blocked in and out of the town, and a number of stricken householders had to be rescued by boat. Plumbers' stores was badly hit. Opened only a year before, floodwater filled the whole of the basement, while the ground floor was flooded to a height of 3 feet. Guildford Fire Brigade pumped out 5 million gallons of water from the basement. Much stock was ruined, including everything in the food hall. Early on the Monday morning, staff at the Yvonne Arnaud Theatre were able to move scenery from the stage to safety. Then the waters rose and completely covered the stage and 100 seats in the auditorium. It receded the next day, but much damage had been done. At his home in Guildford, amateur meteorologist Dennis Mullen recorded 3.75 inches of rain on the Sunday. A Waterboard spokesman said that statistically, the scale of the flood could only happen once in 1,000 years. On Monday the 16th of September, I was booked the double Feltham turn, signing on at 20:30 with driver Bob Stuckey on the first trip and driver Arthur Stretfield on the second. As we went round Addlestone Junction towards Addlestone, in the gloom you could only make out the signal box, as all the surrounding fields resembled a lake, as the nearby River Way at Cox's Lock had broken its bank. My Triumph motorcycle had become rather unreliable in recent months, and to top it all, on the 30th of September, I ran out of petrol on the A3 at Hurtmoor and had to push my bike to a garage at Milford. This was what I think brought on the onset of a back injury which would culminate in having to go into hospital for traction the following summer. In December, I was again booked the double Feltham freight turn, but this time with driver Bill Brain. As mentioned in my first book, Bill was one of those people that lived life to the full and loved his curry, beer, smoking his roll-ups and the ladies, and the hotter the better. the curry that is. When we returned from Felton to Guildford Yard on the first trip, Bill would go and get a curry from the Indian takeaway in Guildford Park Road and stink the cab out as he ate the curry on the way to Felton. In late February 1969, I received a letter from my depot master, Arthur Coe, that I would have to attend Southern House at Croydon for a medical exam, and on passing this would be taking my driver's rules exam, as I would be 23 years of age on the 5th of March. I'd been studying hard with the help of work colleagues several nights a week, as I didn't want to fail the exam. I passed my medical without any problems, and on the 2nd of April I was booked to attend the main office at Woking for my Rules and Regulations exam. This was conducted by Inspector Fred Smith. The exam lasted most of the day, with Fred asking me rules questions such as the 11 propelling moves and the 13 exceptions for passing a signal at danger. After lunch, the protection rules were also covered. Around 4 p.m, Fred informed me that I'd passed my rules exam and would be booked to attend a traction course at a later date. On the 28th of April, I was booked a 3-week course at Waterloo Southside Training School to learn Southern electric units. All the Southern units were covered, from 2 Bill, 2 Hal, 4 Sub and 4 Core Portsmouth Express and Brighton Express, which were Westinghouse brake only units that were built in 1936 and 1946. More modern stock was also covered, such as the 4 EPB, 2 HAP, 4 BEP, 4 SEP and 4 VEP units were built in 1951, 1957 and 1963 respectively. Even the MLV single car units that would run on battery power and non-electrified sidings were covered on this course, not that I ever got to drive one until later on in my railway career. There were 4 trainees on the course, 2 from Waterloo, Alan Cook and Ian Turner, plus Colin Wells and myself from Woking. The course was very enjoyable, some of the lessons and practical work being covered by Bob Phillips and various instructors from different areas of the southern region. I remember going to New Cross Gate to do our static instruction, including preparation and disposal and paddling up procedures, with Derek Gain. I knew Derek well, as I'd fired to him on occasions when he came to Guildford Loco from Salisbury to obtain promotion as a driver. The 1936 subunit collected its power from the third rail via shoes attached to a shoe beam arrangement, and the train's equipment and motors could be isolated from the third rail by several methods depending on the severity of the reasons, i.e. fire on the train, power earth fault, etc. If an emergency occurred and it was of vital importance to get the current switched off immediately, a short circuiting bar could be utilised to create a short circuit between the conductor rail and running rail, and the effect of this would be that the line breakers in the control room that was supplying the current would trip. As long as the short circuiting bar was kept in place, the current could not be returned, as it would immediately trip the line breaker as soon as the control room operator tried to replace it. After 2 attempts of replacing the line breakers, the control room operator would then need to ascertain the cause of the short circuit before trying to replace the switch. Another option would be to ask for a current isolation. This could be done via the electrification telephone or a signal post telephone via the signalman. The person asking for the isolation was the only person that could obtain permission to restore the current. The traction motors were situated beneath each driving cab on a 4-car unit and beneath one cab on a 2-car unit, and could be isolated if necessary by operating a pole switch using the master switch key. The train's power line was also protected by copper strip fuses, and these would not only protect the equipment but could be removed to isolate the equipment or unit from the conductor rail supply. In order to remove or replace these fuses, a number of wooden paddles would be utilised. The wooden paddles placed under the shoes acted as an insulator to allow the driver to remove and replace the fuses. It was important to remember that all shoes must be paddled up, and this was especially important when dealing with units in multiple, because a train line jumper existed between units which allowed the current to go to both units' equipment even if there was only one shoe on the conductor rail. The driver would walk round the unit on both sides to ensure all shoes were paddled up, because in certain areas the conductor rail might exist on both sides of the line. The 4 sub and 2 Bill, 2 Hal and 4 Core Portsmouth Express units had a Westinghouse air brake. Subsequent stock, built in 1951, 1957 and 1963, possessed a combined Westinghouse and electro-pneumatic brake. All of the units that only had a Westinghouse brake had a set of keys, brake valve and master switch, which were connected to each other by a length of cord. When changing ends at a terminus, for instance, it would be necessary to take the keys with you to drive from the other end, unless working in an 8 car. The purpose of the keys being connected with cord was that it wouldn't be then possible to accidentally leave a brake valve open in another cab. The Westinghouse brake was an excellent brake system, but had to be used with caution, because although it was possible to partially apply the brake, it was not possible to partially release it. Once a brake handle was moved to the release position, all brakes were completely released throughout the train. I thoroughly enjoyed my time driving the subunits, and as time went on, I mastered the art of using the Westinghouse brake, and preferred to use it even on stock that possessed the EP brake, as I found it more challenging. In 2011, Bob Hunt, a good friend of mine and fellow fireman at Guildford, gave me a sub-controller which he'd acquired some years ago from Selhurst Depot. Another 2 friends of mine had acquired one each at the same time and had cleaned them up as Railwayman exhibits. I'm pleased to say that the one I possess is also in fine fettle, and considering it was created in the same year as I was born, it is in better nick than myself. Cab controls were very basic: a brake handle and power controller, the latter having to be held down by hand pressure all the time the train was moving. If the pressure on the controller was released for any reason, i.e. the driver becoming incapacitated or falling asleep, the dead man would operate, cutting off power to the traction motors and instantly applying the emergency brake. Creature comforts weren't apparent either. A small swivel seat was fixed on a bracket on the inside of the driver's door, and in a lot of cases drivers stood up most of the time, as the seats were quite uncomfortable. There were no other seats, and if you had anyone else ride with you in the cab, they had to stand. On subunits, the only instrument gauge present was a duplex main reservoir, air brake pipe pressure gauge. There were no luxuries of a speedometer, line indicator, brake cylinder gauge, AWS or headlight. The head code was displayed using metal stencils held within a metal frame. This was fixed in front on a white background, the background being lit during darkness. Changing the head code stencil frame was normally carried out by opening the hinge window on the non-driver's side. The voltage of these units was between 600 to 750 volts, so extra care was required when operating the Bakelite handled knife switches, or when changing fuses that were contained in the switch and fuse cupboard. If handled with care, the high voltage knife switches were not dangerous, and drivers were always taught to keep their other hand in their pocket and not to be holding on to any metal parts whilst performing this task. The reason being thus: electricity will find its quickest path to earth, and should you accidentally touch a high voltage switch and be touching metal framing, etc., the path of electricity would flow across the heart area and could cause a cardiac arrest. Therefore, if you weren't touching anything metal with your other hand, the path of electricity would probably not occur, as your shoes or boots would act as an insulator. I always remember my instructor saying, "If you touch that, lad, you'll end up picking your nose with your elbow." The equipment box contained 1. Control and brake keys with a connecting cord, 2. Detonators, 3. Red flags, 4 and 5. Spare fuses of various amperages, and the box was secured by an S key. This photograph shows the trip and set control switch, which was used to reset traction motor overloads, but was quite often unofficially used for a completely different purpose. When moving the switch to the set position, an arc or large spark would be created. Drivers would use this spark to ignite a folded strip of newspaper to light their cigarettes. The driving cabs on 2-car and 4-car EPBs, built in 1953 and 1957, were more comfortable, as was the stock built in 1963, 4-VET, 4-SEP, 4-BIG, 4-SIG, etc. The next photo shows the controls of an EPB unit. 1. Power controller. 2. Combined master and reverser switch. 3. 5-position brake incorporating EP, electro-pneumatic and Westinghouse brake. 4. AWS, automatic warning system. 5. Speedometer. 6. Louder phone to allow communication between driver and guard. 7. Head code box with roller blind numbers instead of stencils. It also had a seat for another person to sit in the cab. An even more modern design was incorporated within the 1963 type units. 1. Power controller DSD. 2. Master switch. 3. Two-tone horn. 4. 3-position EP auto brake. 5. EP auto brake selector switch. 6. AWS. 7. Louder phone. 8. Duplex main reservoir air brake pipe pressure gauge. 9. Brake cylinder gauge. 10. Speedometer. 11. Brake supply, line indicator, MG and earth fault flags. 12. Overload reset. 13. Aux power on, aux power off, engine stop buttons, only used when the unit is connected in multiple with an electro diesel or push-pull Crompton. 14. Series only switch. Prior to the start of my 2-day exam on the 14th of May, my companion from Woking, Colin Wells, went sick, which meant that I had to undertake the exam on my own, my examiner being Bob Phillips. As Bob wasn't a southwestern man, the exam was conducted on the Central Division, and on the second day, 15th of May, I remember working my final train from Coulsdon North to Victoria, where Bob informed me that I'd passed my driving exam and duly handed me my EP key. A very memorable event in my railway career. EP keys from left to right. Effingham Junction EP key. EP key number 7145, given to me by traction instructor Bob Phillips on the 15th of May 1969 to mark that I'd passed my EMU traction exam, and a brass EP key with my initials specially engineered by Charlie Hampshire on a lathe that I'd given him as a gift.